Well, hello again, and welcome to Painless Universal Conversation with myself and Welsh. Today we'll be talking about how do you rise and start a career to the top of your professional game and overcome challenges being a woman, Black woman, but you're overlooking all this pain to get to the top of your game. My guest, Alencia Johnson, will just be telling us how she achieved all this. She is a social impact, brand engagement, and communication strategist. She's worked with corporates, politicians, and nonprofits, and she helps them to bring out the best in their jobs. What really excites me about my guest today, Alencia, is that when she does a job, she does it to her full ability. And she'll be talking about her challenges she's gone through along the way and how she's made it to the top of her game. Alencia, as most of you might not know, was a senior advisor to the current president when he was the Vice President, Joe Biden, for his campaign, Developing Black Media and Cultural Strategies. Early in 2020 presidential cycle, she served as the National Director of the Public Engagement for Senator Elizabeth Warren presidential campaign as well. She manages strategy rollouts of the Senator Warren's policy proposal, utilizing media strategy, surrogates endorsement, cultural movement, and in-person events. Prior to that, she spent many years as a Planned Parenthood Federation of America, where she engaged politicians, media, and entertainment companies, and also influencers to shift the culture and attitude towards a more positive mindset. Alencia is very positive about standing with Black women. She's building this framework about developing this planned parenting, especially towards the Black women, so that communication is done more subtly and they taking into account the various culture issue. On behalf of the Planned Parenting Action Fund, she developed an election strategy for the Secretary Hillary Clinton presidential campaign. In 2012, she worked on the re-election presidential campaign for President Obama. So you can just know the nature of my guest, who I'm talking to. She's someone who's there, who understands what it takes to be a mover and shaker in today's world. Finally, you can hear so much of her commentary on places such as the News One, BET, Washington Post, and many, many more. She's received numerous awards for her work. And today, the focus of our conversation is not really understanding who is Alencia. How did she work so hard from humble beginnings to work in such a very hard-reaching area, and now doing her best to help other women to shine and be on top? Let's talk to our wonderful guest, Alencia, as we discuss overcoming pain to finding your joy. Meet Alencia Johnson. Well, hello everyone, and welcome again to Painless Universal, a conversation with myself and Welsh. As I said in the introduction, today's conversation is really about women empowerment and how we could find our joy, no matter what we're going through, to still rise up above. My guest, Alencia Johnson, who will be talking about her own struggles along and how she's found her joy along the way. I've told you a lot about her, but let's hear it from her. Alencia, how are you?
I am wonderful. And I actually authentically mean that, because I've been taking some time to just enjoy life and to rest. And as my friends say, you're glowing. And that's because I'm literally taking more time for myself. And so I feel really good right now.
And I love that you started with that, because I think this is something a lot of people struggle with. A lot of people struggle with finding that time to really sit back and say, you know what, it's me. I just need that time, and I'm glad you did that. Before we get into anything, could you just tell us a little bit about what did you do differently? How are you enjoying this time out, and where are you joining me from?
Yeah, so I have, and I'm sure we're going to get into my career and in my bio. Thank you so much for the introduction. I have spent most of my life in service to people. And I do believe that my purpose is to be in service to the world. And I've also grown up kind of in the spotlight. And so, in my early 30s, I finally realized that I've been living my life for everyone except for myself. And this pandemic, I'm grateful in that I haven't lost employment or anything. And so I have been actually in the position to think about how I want to design my life coming out of the pandemic. And granted, we're still in the middle of the pandemic, but how do I want to design my life afterwards and after we come out of this? And I've been learning a lot more about healthy boundaries with myself, as well as with friends and family and professionally, especially because when we have boundaries, we can show up as our best self in the spaces that we want to be in. And it's allowed me to hopefully move through the guilt of taking time to sleep 8-9 hours. And here in the US, that's not looked upon as what you should do if you are, ambitious and want to be successful. I've spent like the last 2.5-3 months just traveling and meeting people that I haven't seen in so long. And out of all of those trips, only one was work related. They all were just things that I wanted to do. And I don't regret it. And it is making me now getting back into the swing of things in regards to my work, showing up better. But I've also shown up better for my friends and my family in the past few months because I have taken care of myself first, and I'm doing so unapologetically.
I'm so glad you started doing that, because I think, we've seen in the media so many athletes, for example, it's so typical that we always overwork ourselves and we forget ourselves in that whole process. We even forget our loved ones, our family, our friends, because we're so disciplined and trying to achieve more. And this pandemic, I think, has taught everyone that, sometimes it's okay to just take a seat back and just reflect and take that time out for you. And in doing so, you've just described how this has helped you and shape you. But a lot of people might not know, you have achieved so many great things. You have done a lot. I was reading your bio and thinking, wow, how did you get there? Can you just tell us a little bit about your humble beginnings? How did it start for you to get on this path?
Well, thank you for that. And to be honest, again, taking this time, it allows me to sit back and also be overwhelmed by the blessings and the responsibilities that I've been given to be responsible with. So my father's a preacher, so I grew up in the church, and I'm an only child. So being the daughter of the pastor is, again, as I mentioned, all eyes have been on me for a while. But it also taught me a lot about my faith and my own guiding principles. That is, the work of Jesus, as I call him, an activist. If we really study his words and if we really study what he did versus what some religions like to say to distort to their own beliefs, we know that he was very selfless, and he ministered to people that, even then folks wouldn't talk to, the poor among us, to even women and some sex workers and people who were the outcasts, right? The people on the margins. And he was a radical revolutionary. That's how I look at Jesus. And so growing up with my faith, along with my family, who I saw my mother at one point having to work 3 jobs to support our family. My grandmother, even though she had her own pie selling business, she was also very much rooted in her community, from NAACP meetings to working and volunteering for gubernatorial races to President Obama's campaign. I just saw her doing so much. And I realized that we have an innate responsibility to use our gifts for other people, not to be burnt out, which is a lesson that I had to learn later on in life, but that the gifts that we are given are actually on loan to fulfill purpose. And that is to bring more community, to bring more wholeness around us. And so I had all of that grounding, but I also grew up in a very maternal family, in that my mother has 2 sisters. My grandmother had 17 siblings, majority of whom that were still alive when I was younger are women. So you had all of these like powerful women in my life who were literally the embodiment of, you might slow me down, but you won't stop me. And I'm not going to ask for permission. I'm going to ask for forgiveness. And so they literally would always just tell me to, grab the bull by its horns and go for it, what it is that you believe in. And so that is what I did. And in high school, I thought I wanted to potentially go, and I thought I wanted to go into politics. I also thought I wanted to go be a journalist. And then I also wanted to be an actress or a dancer. So like there's all of those things kind of make sense now and how I show up in life. But I was like, these are all the things that I wanted to do. But I really honed into the piece around media because I felt like if more people who look like me, whether young, Black women from the South, whatever it may be, saw people talking about issues that they cared about, saw people talking about civic engagement, they would be willing and excited to be more involved. And then when I got to college and started interning at news stations, I realized I'm actually not an unbiased person. I have very strong opinions. And so that's when I leaned into more politics and social justice, and still understanding there's a media element to some of that work eventually. But I knew that whatever work I did had to actually have a position on certain things that I believed to be true in the world, the things that I believed should happen in the world in order for more people to have opportunity. And so I am grateful that my parents supported all of those dreams. My grandmother supported all of those dreams. My community did. And, my mother and I talk about this all the time. She's like, people always ask, how did you start working for these people? I've worked for 2 now presidents of the United States, right? And some of the most powerful people in the world. And, they couldn't put a call in like some people who don't look like me can, right? Mm-hmm. My parents didn't know how I could get an internship at a news station, but they did support me figuring it out. And they did, fortunately, by the time I was in college and in my 20s, sometimes having to take jobs that didn't have a lot of resources, they were able to support that within reason. And I know that the sacrifices they made also give me the responsibility of, okay, so how can I create and foster an environment for more young people of color, especially to have these opportunities and have more resources and support as well.
That's really amazing that you did that. Did you find university, because you went to Newport University? I mean, is it Christopher Newport University? Do you find that helped shape your thinking and help in that political arena? Because a lot of young people I know want to go into the political side or want to go into the careers like yourself, but they don't know if the university would actually help that, shaping. And what experience would you say you got from that?
The funniest thing about where I went to school is that the president of the university is a former Republican state senator here in Virginia. And I am very much I vote mostly Democratic. I identify as a progressive. But the funniest thing is that he and I had the greatest relationship because I was always on campus causing a ruckus and good trouble, as the late John Lewis would say. And it was important for me to choose a university that developed leadership skills. And one of my older cousins had gone there and he wanted me to look at it. And I was thinking of big universities, but he said, you actually want to be a big fish in a small pond so that you can learn and absorb as much as possible.
Absolutely.
And he was telling me that they had this leadership program where they were literally teaching students how to be leaders in their community. And it was a minor. So in addition to my communication studies degree, I have a leadership minor. And I was learning about the theory of leadership versus management. I had opportunities. I had a scholarship to also study abroad. I went to China one summer, which gave me a global perspective of the world. And while politically, some of the leadership at the university and I disagree, and then some of them I agree with, they fostered that. They were like, oh, Alencia's starting a protest today about something. That's great, right? Mm-hmm. Or Alencia is pushing for a certain organization to be chartered on campus. That's amazing. And I am so grateful that they allowed for me to do that. Now, my academic professor, I'm going to be very honest, my academic advisor, he wasn't the happiest with me because, as he told my parents at graduation, he was like, I could have given her better grades if she had come to class on time, but she was out here causing a ruckus. But we laugh about it now because all of those experiences really did help shape who I am. And I knew I wasn't going on to be a lawyer or a doctor, so I didn't need to go into law school or medical school. But, just being surrounded by people who fostered that curiosity of the world, who also believed in standing up for the rights of my own people and the people around me. And so it's really important when young people are looking at college and university to find a place that's going to support them in that development of figuring out the world. And I honestly believe that young people are going to save this world. And now in my 30s, I look at my cousins who are in college and I'm like, oh my God, you're more radical than I was. I have to catch up. I mean, they are just literally going to save us. And speaking of studying abroad in China, when I was there, I was learning of the protests in Tiananmen Square decades ago. And of course, that was led by young college students, right? So many of the great movements in this world, the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, so many of these movements were started by young people. And it's so important to go to a university that supports that and also understand how you can coexist with people who disagree with you, and you're still safe, right? Because there are people who disagree with you and you feel as though they are not promoting safety, but I felt safe to have disagreements there.
Well, that's really good. That's really important. I love what you said, because it's being disagreeing in a disagreement, but still feel safe, because you could have those disagreements and then you're not, threatened about sleeping at night with someone come knocking at my door, would I be safe? And that leads me, you were a Black woman, and the thing that's happening is seen around the world, the United States especially, so many Black women want to do things, but there's so much pain they have to endure to get to a level. You left university, but you have to think, as a Black woman, it's so difficult to knock on these doors for corporate to take you serious. And you have managed to work on very, very, very high profile politicians. How did you manage? Because it's a critical question for young Black people who are looking, I want to get where she has been, but I don't know how to start. I know I started because I got the opportunity through the schemes they were offering for young Black ethnic minority people. In your space, how did you find out those opportunities after you leave university?
I love that question. And it's a question that I wish I would have spent more time with when I was younger. My therapist and I talk about it, and how there are so many of these barriers in our way, and that they're also very cultural and societal, right? So they are bigger than the one or two things that you or I can do in our day-to-day life, right? These are really systematic, right? And so when I left college, I had a beautiful resume tape of news clips and being out in the field, and President Obama had just won. And I said, well, I actually don't want to be a reporter. I want to go into politics, because lo and behold, there are people who write the things that these politicians say and do behind closed doors. And I realized, oh, I could actually shape what President Obama or any elected official is saying, and then eventually maybe be a political commentator on TV. Well, it doesn't happen overnight. And my mother called me and said, your apartment lease is ending. It's time for you to come home. You just need to get a job until you can figure things out. And she worked for a company, Geico, a major insurance company here. And she said, get a temp job here. I was an hour from DC, so I could spend time going to Washington, DC and interning. Lo and behold, that company's headquarters was in Washington, DC, and they had a communications job opening in their corporate office. And I applied for it and I got it. And I said, okay, God, you've put together a few pieces of the puzzle: a job in Washington, DC, a job in communications. And I was able to work with the public affairs team and work with organizations like the Urban League and the Boys and Girls Club. So community-based organizations who have political and policy implications. I said, okay, I can be networking. And so I took that, and I took it as an opportunity to create the skills I needed to move on to politics, but also understanding that I was getting no's left and right. I got no's from jobs in the administration at the time, on Capitol Hill, even at Geico, certain promotions or certain opportunities I was passed up for. But I had to remember that my grandmother taught me these lessons early on in life to have the resilience to push through the systemic barriers. And also I started building a community of a lot of my girlfriends and I were going through the same things, and we started talking about it more, right? Of course, we're talking about our fashion and the guys that we're dating, but we should also be talking about our professional experiences. And I was seeking out older Black women at Geico, as well as in the world, to talk to and as mentors to help me work through those tough moments when it felt like not only did I do everything right, I did it better than the prototype, and yet Susie over here or Billy over here, who doesn't even have any of my background, is getting the promotion or is getting the, the acknowledgement for it. And so having the right people around me really helped me early on, so that when the opportunity came years later to work on President Obama's re-election campaign, the person who hired me, and to this day we talk about it, she said, "You weren't the most qualified for the position, but you were the most recommended." Because I had worked so hard and had so many people around me, and they knew that I can rise to the occasion. Someone just needs to take a chance on her. And had I not been building that community, even when most days I hated that job. Like I literally used my lunch break, and after work, I'd be like, where could I go? Where could I find a better job? But because I had built such a strong network and had been showing up 100%, right? I believe that you have to be, the scripture says, faithful over few things so that you can be blessed with more responsibility, right? And had it not been for all of that, I wouldn't have gotten those recommendations. I wouldn't have had people who I don't even know to this day were calling and saying, you have to hire her for me to get that job. And then not only did I rise to the occasion, but I excelled at it and succeeded at it, and proved that just as much as folks want to give, young people a privilege, or people of privilege, white people, white men, opportunities without the skill set, we also deserve those as well. And because there's so much against us, more times than not, we are going to rise to that moment.
I love that. I love that, because I love that someone gave you that opportunity, but that didn't just come. You actually worked so hard to really get yourself recognized. So you were still doing the job, but you were realizing that this is not just going to come so easy. I can't just sit in this job to make this work. And you made it work. And I think anyone listening, any young person who's listening, who's confused about how do I get to the next, how do I get myself recognized? Sometimes being recognized is not just sitting comfortable where you are. It's actually networking, finding the mentors, finding people who will speak on your behalf. I'm really glad you said that, because this is such a critical thing that we need to keep talking about. More and more Black women need to keep talking about challenges they face and how they overcame those challenges to get to where they are today. And I think this leads me to your own social. You have an impact company where you really help companies. You bring corporate, you bring charities, as we call them here in the United Kingdom, and you bring them together, and you really make almost like a matchmaking, finding out the right way, but also helping them with their social impact. How did you do that, and why did you decide to set up this company?
I love that you called me like a matchmaker. I hadn't identified myself as that yet. I've been calling myself like a connector and a disruptor for good, but I like this matchmaking too. I'm going to add that. So thank you. Over the years, I worked on President Obama's campaign. Then afterwards, I worked for Planned Parenthood Federation of America, which is the largest not only reproductive healthcare provider in the United States, but also the largest advocacy organization for reproductive rights and gender equity. And it has been very politicized here in the United States. But as much as it's been politicized, there's a whole lot of power behind it, women power behind it. Like, oh, hell no, you will not take away my rights and my bodily autonomy. And so it has a lot of movement behind it, and is I will say that it's one of the strongest armies. It's a pink army. Like if you mess with reproductive rights in the United States, there's a whole pink army to push back. And so I spent 6 years there working on political campaigns, but also working with major corporations and the entertainment industry to take a stance on critical issues as it relates to gender equality, women's rights, yes, reproductive rights, but even more, like pay equity, so many different things. And why we spent so much time doing that was because, much like the LGBTQ movement, they realized oh, we need to stop spending all this time lobbying to politicians and changing the hearts and minds of people and exposing more people in the public to experiences that they may not ever encounter with, whether people of different sexualities or women who have different experiences than other women, whatever it may be, right? And so the power of culture became so incredibly clear while during those transformative 6 years, and how storytelling is so important. You know, there is this statistic out there that over 50% of people believe the healthcare information they get from television and film. Television and film is mostly scripted, but people believe the healthcare information there. They get they get how they view people who they don't come encounter with every single day. There are people who still live with only people that they look like. So their first introduction to a Black person or to an Indigenous person or a trans person or whoever comes from television and film. And we don't think about how that shapes our beliefs. And so I spent so much time working in that industry to help normalize stories of just going and getting checked for an STD or birth control. And that, like, it doesn't have to be this drawn out storyline. It could just be girlfriends at brunch saying, oh yeah, I went and got my pap smear today, everything's get right? Like, oh, did you get your mammogram because your mother has breast cancer, right? Like, these can be actual just parts of a full story, right? Because that's how we're talking to our girlfriends or our friends or our family. And on the flip side with corporations, there's a study from Edelman, which is a major public relations firm here, and it's actually global. And their research shows that majority of people trust brands and corporations to take a stance on critical issues more so than the government, particularly people who are at the margins. And so you'll see in the United States, like with voting rights under attack, that's why we are lobbying for the Coca-Colas of the world, the Delta Airlines of the world, the Apples of the world, take a stance on these voting rights legislation so that people are forced to make the right decision. And so after spending all of that time doing that and figuring out how to shape public narratives and then going on to work for, while I was at Planned Parenthood, I also did some work with Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, which was also very devastating that she lost. However, as a Black woman, and I saw Donald Trump growing up and where I grew up in Virginia, I knew he had a lot of support, and I was very clear that he could win and that we were taking this opportunity for granted. And the Republicans here in the United States did a wonderful smear campaign on Hillary Clinton since she started running for office in her Senate days, right? Talk about public narrative, right? And they just kept perpetuating it, unfortunately. And that's what happens to women leaders. And then fast forward, I worked for Elizabeth Warren, who is a very prominent United States Senator here that people love. I worked on her presidential campaign, again, knowing that our country is still very sexist and was not ready for a woman president. But also they wanted some stability, which is why I understood why President Biden came and won. And I worked for him as well. And through all of that, I collected so many different relationships and contacts and kind of became this person that people would just call when they would say, hey, what should we do? Or we're thinking about, particularly corporations or people in the entertainment industry, hey, we want to write a big check to this organization. And I would say, well, actually, the check is helpful for your annual report, but this organization actually needs these kind of resources. Or it'd be better if you took a stance on this issues for your employees and made a public statement about it, because that would help the legislative agenda that this organization is fighting for. And as I started thinking about the conversations I would be in every single day with people who were my friends, just trying to figure it out, I said, oh, well, this is the work that I should do in life. And this is what I should put out in the world. And I call it 1063 West Broad because that is my grandmother's address, God rest her soul. And she taught me that you can do all of these things. You can believe in economic empowerment. And that was my first example of Black women in entrepreneurship. And you can give to your community and you can look good while you're doing it. My grandmother was the flyest person in Virginia that I had ever met, but also that represents the culture piece of it. Like, you can do good and also love culture, and all of these things can come together purposefully. And that is the work that me and my team are just so blessed and fortunate to do every single day.
I love your grandmother. I think she's such a legend because, it's really true. We women, we always have this doubt in our mind. I remember when I first started out, I always asked myself, should I look a certain way? Should I be this way? And it's always this doubt. Am I getting these opportunities because of the way I look? Or how am I not getting these opportunities because of the way I look? How should I? There is always these questions. And as women, we never know what answers we should give ourselves. Should we say less makeup, more makeup, or less this or this? And your grandmother is just a really good example of just you should be the best version of yourself and just show up. That's all that really, really matters. Just be the best version of yourself. Yeah. If they want you, they will go for you. And if not, they don't. Because in your lessons in life, you've worked with so many prominent people. You've worked with President Obama. You've worked with the current president, Joe Biden. You've worked with Elizabeth Warren and Hillary Clinton as well. What lessons, leadership lessons, would you say you could share with us that you've learned from these experiences of working on their political campaign to get them from A to B? What lessons would you think they teach you that the rest of the world, the rest of us need to know?
To not be afraid of failure. And I have learned that you mentioned all of them. And I'm also thinking about some of the great civil rights leaders that I've had the opportunity to work with, along with some of the most amazing, brilliant people behind the scenes. And all of the people that I've been able to work with have not been afraid of failure, so long as your mission is towards equity, towards good, towards justice, right? It's not going to be easy. We're not going to win everybody over with one campaign. We're not going to win everybody over with this one strategy. But as long as we continue to get up and try again over and over and over, then it's worth it. Because that's what the people who are looking to us are asking us to do, is to continue to try and fight for them, because they can't fight for themselves at that moment, right? Like they are not able to step away from whatever job it is that they have and be on this political campaign or organize these communities. They are leaning to us to use our proximity or power to change things. And so with that, we have to be humble enough to not be afraid of failure. And when the times that hasn't worked out, or the times that something hasn't worked out, was when we were so focused on perfection versus actually doing what it was that was required from us for the people in those moments. And so that is a lesson that I take very seriously. And I have to remind myself of, Alencia, don't be afraid of failure. And also don't have so much control that you will not allow someone else to try something and they fail and learn too. Because the only way that people are going to learn is if they're given the permission and the room to fail and grow and adjust. Another thing that I have learned from really powerful people, people of influence, really successful folks, is their ability to acknowledge when they have caused harm, even if that wasn't their intention. I firmly believe that a lot of times people stay focused on the intention versus the impact. And the intention is very self-serving and very ego-driven, while the impact is about the community. And so you and I can do a lot of things out of good intention, but it can still have a harmful impact on people. And the most important thing is how you have impacted people. And so oftentimes I find myself in conversations apologizing and saying, you know what my intention was good. However, the most important piece of this is how you felt and how, you felt in that situation. And so I have negatively impacted you or hurt you. And so for that, I'm sorry, let's figure out a way to do this a little bit better, right? And so those are a couple lessons that I take with me and try to apply them in all areas of life, professionally and personally.
That's really good. You've won numerous awards. You've such as at Harvard University, you've Women of the Year. You've won the Ebony Magazine Power 100, and you've done so much. What changes, what lessons did you achieve by winning these awards? Did it change your perspective that people are starting to recognize your work?
I think they have a little bit, in that they are reminders of I'm on the right path, but also a reminder that just as quickly as it's given, it can be taken away. And also that there's so much more in the world and that you don't know who's watching you. A lot of these things have come along and I'm like, I didn't even know you all were paying attention. The Ebony Power 100 list is one of, for me, that is kind of one of the most prestigious in my mind, because I remember growing up and reading Ebony and Jet magazine at my grandmother's house or in the hair salon, right? It is such a staple in the Black community that talked about civil rights and politics, but also fashion and entertainment and our humanity. It just literally talked about all of Blackness. And so for this legacy brand to recognize me, and I'm like in my 20s, I was overwhelmed. And it also reminds me that there's so much more to be done. And that, you know, in that phase of my life, I'm a vessel who was recognized, but there are so many other people to bring to the table. And you spoke about this earlier too, about being authentic and showing up unapologetic. And I've found now where I am in life, the more authentic I show up, the more unapologetic I show up. I mean, I would have never thought that I would show up on MSNBC with my hair braided, because when I was growing up, I thought you had to have the perfect haircut and the perfect look. And now I show up however I want to in my fullness. And I realized that there are so many more things coming, right? And more things that are making sense. And I also feel as though it's allowing for me to be more relatable to folks, which allows for me to be an even greater vessel. And so those honors are just reminders of what is possible, but what is also to come, and also the responsibility of just doing so much for my people and ensuring that I am always taking in our collective needs into those spaces.
My final question before I let you go, Alencia, the world is, there's so much social injustice in the world right now. You know, we talk about the Black Lives Matter, we talk about, you know, giving girls confidence, the mental health breakdown. What would you say that needs to be done? As you know, you do this critic every time. I've read some of your critics and they're really amazing. What would you say that needs to be done for the world to move more to a positive place, to empower more Black women? You see Goldman Sachs, for example, is doing empowering Black women. And I think they have the aim to empower so many Black women by setting in 10 years, empowering, they've got this 10 billion fund to 10 years to empower Black women. In your opinion, what needs to be done to really give Black women confidence to really believe in themselves, that they can do it and it can be done?
Yeah, and congratulations to the team that's worked on that Goldman Sachs partnership. It's actually some friends of mine, their agency were helping Goldman Sachs with that, which is so empowering and powerful for that investment in Black women's entrepreneurship, because we are the highest the largest population of entrepreneurs, and particularly in this country. You know, it's those investments that are really important that will continue to empower us. What's more important is the power sharing. And sometimes that requires people to get up out of their seats, right? Because we always say we have to make room at the table, you know, bring our seat to the table. Some tables can only hold 3 or 4 seats. And so therefore, people in power sometimes actually have to get up out of their seats so that we can usher in new leadership. In the United States, the census that just came out shows that people of color, our population is on the rise, and white people, for the first time in decades, their population is decreasing. And so that's why we're seeing this push and agitation for certain laws to create certain levels of power, even as our demographics change. And so that power sharing is really important. And for us as Black women, I think we have to continue to show up as our authentic selves so that people are forced to embrace that. And so now, you know, here in the United States, there's this act called the Crown Act that is pushing against the discrimination based on our hairstyles in the workplace, which in the 21st century, it's like, this shouldn't even be a thing, but white people have never had to think about that. Black women, we have, right? We've always had to think about what I look like. Do I look professional enough? And even if I do, quote unquote, I'm still going to face discrimination. And so I believe us living unapologetically in our truth and how we look, how we show up, and our rest. Rest is a form of radical resistance, embracing that we don't have to save every community because we've done that for so long. It is forcing people to shift their thinking and their way to engage with us, because even in all of that, they can't get done a lot of things without Black women. There's also research, I'd like to bring research into this, prove my points, but there's this research out there too that shows that Black women particularly drive popular culture. We drive all of the trends, fashion, beauty, art, we drive those trends. So if I'm resting, you're gonna have to wait, because you cannot get what you want until I'm working or I'm thriving. And so I'm going to rest in order for me to show up. And so think of taking care of ourselves and showing up as ourselves as the resistance to push against these barriers. Because if we collectively all did it, I mean, I think the world would literally have to do a 180 and cater to our existence versus the other way around.
This is truly amazing. I really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are, but to take this time out to speak to me about this conversation, truly amazing. Alencia Johnson, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.